Hello everyone, my name is Blade Brisky, and this is going to be my HSEM F434 final presentation for the class. My presentation is on the Port of Anchorage, which is located in Anchorage, Alaska. As you can see above, that is an aerial view above of the port. The man-made hazards of the Port of Anchorage that I identified for my project was going to be a hijacking of a possible plane, that could be a commercial and or private, a cyber attack on the Port of Anchorage, contamination of water such as rivers, oceans, any water source from a chemical spill. A multi-shooter situation involving the Port of Anchorage. And my final man-made hazard would be a lone gunman entering the Port of Anchorage premises. The next we're going to be talking about the natural hazards that the Port of Anchorage could be susceptible to. My first one on the list is going to be earthquakes. Following that would be tsunamis, wildfires, floods, and lastly, a volcanic eruption. Now, these natural hazards which are very common in the state of Alaska. Earthquakes. Alaska is very prone to that. It's actually the number one most. The earthquakes happen the most here out of any other place in the United States. Tsunamis, they result from some earthquakes. Usually, a major earthquake has to trigger for a severe tsunami to have effect on mainland, but there has been the recorded tsunamis in previous centuries that there has been tsunamis that have affected Alaska drastically. Wildfires are also a big thing that we see every summer. It's just the mass amounts of wooded areas that we have around here and the dry summers, and wildfires can just be a very big problem. Floods as well. We have rivers constantly flowing throughout the state of Alaska, which can cause some trouble. And we have quite a few volcanic eruptions. Over the last 2 decades, we've had numerous eruptions that have affected flight patterns and just civilian life in general, which affected the Port of Anchorage. Next on here is a Port of Anchorage assessment. The port is a well-known icon in Anchorage, Alaska. It's very used. It's one of our main importing places for the city and the state of Alaska. We get numerous things such as food, fuel, cars, all sorts of resources that we use every day that keep the city of Anchorage going. The Port of Anchorage it's so necessary and it's very useful that they have a high level of security, and their clearance for security is very high. It's actually government issued identification and security screen to even enter. And as you can see, they take their security very seriously, because if there's anything that would happen to this, it would drastically decrease in profits and just the overall safety of their workers. Continuing on the Port of Anchorage assessment, one of the main things that this port is imported is fuel from the Nikiski pipeline. Now, this helps run the Port of Anchorage overall. Also, they transport fuel on certain barges to different villages, towns, cities, and just all sorts of things. They're contracted with a certain Doyon Universal Services, which provides that security that they drastically need to run a proficient port. Now, the Department of Homeland Security actually recognized the Port of Anchorage as a regionally significant and designated it as a second-tier port facility, which is very impressive, especially for the state of Alaska and just their size overall. Just reaching that second-tier port facility is a great level that they reached. Continuing on that, the Port of Anchorage is very useful along with the Jayburg military base. They have a good relationship for deployment, staging, fighter jets, and whatever else they need, if needed. There are pipelines and fuel storage places that kind of cause for some hazardous awareness that they need to be aware of, and if they ever have to deal with that, they're trained and capable of. I mentioned earlier, barges are consistently just moving fuel from city to city or in other locations around Alaska and the lower 48. Continuing on, this is going to be my risk matrix. It's containing the natural and man-made hazards that I mentioned earlier. As you can see in the lower left corner down here, in the green, the lighter green, that is just a less percentage of chance of it occurring in the state of Alaska, and it has a less monetary value. As you move more towards the right, you're going to get drastically, there's more money involved in each situation, and the amount of the probability of that event actually happening. So you can see the least amount of occurrences would be a tsunami or a lone gunman. As we move more to the top right, floods become more apparent, hijackings of a plane. I said that because of how many private planes there are. People have been known to take planes. There actually was an occurrence earlier this year when a man actually flew into a building downtown Anchorage. Now, if we keep moving, the most deadly hazard that I identified for the Port of Anchorage were going to be wildfires and contamination of the ocean from a chemical spill. Now, this ranged from $1 billion to $9 billion of damage, and it has a 10 to 100% chance of happening. So that's from these things, this is what you're going to mostly focus on and move your way down, because the ones below it are going to have a less chance of likelihood of actually occurring and a less monetary value to the Port of Anchorage and the state. Now we're going to look at the risk matrix analysis of that. So I mentioned earlier the highest risk hazards that the Port of Anchorage will face were going to be wildfires and that chemical spill. Now we're going to, I mentioned earlier, $1 billion to $9 billion of possible damage. Continue on with the risk matrix assumptions. Wildfires are very common in the state of Alaska. They happen every year. There's not a summer with that one. The Port of Anchorage is surrounded by a wooded area, so that's why I kind of rate it pretty high, that the fire and the smoke damage could possibly affect the port and any equipment they may have near the border of their location. The chemical spill, I want to say that's going to be the biggest problem they may have. You have a pipeline, you never know what can happen. There's always accidents. People are not perfect. As well as transportation of that. We've seen in previous years there's always been oil rigs that end up spilling, and we cannot eliminate that possibility of the Port of Anchorage being 100% safe. And that's why I put that as one of my highest hazards, because it's so much money to put into that cleanup effort, and as well as losing all that fuel and oil or any other chemicals that they're transporting, they lose out on that possible usage. So we're going to little countermeasures to handle these things. The security system they already have in play, which is a very good security system that I looked up into. I would just continue keeping up with that. It's a good way to keep down on, from my previous hazards, man-made active shooters. It keeps people having to get security screening so they cannot bring any possible danger firearms into the area. From previous natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina, they had levees that did somewhat help the city of Katrina, but of New Orleans, sorry. But the levees could have been built better. And so installing levees into the Port of Anchorage actually could possibly decrease the effects of floods and possible tsunamis on the port, which would prevent any possible damage to the port, or at least mitigate it. Making sure all the buildings and rigs on the property are just built to code, because if there was an earthquake to strike, it would be very beneficial for the Port of Anchorage to have buildings up to code. Final countermeasures would just be a proper company structure, just like internally, from a human resource manager, just for employees to have someone to talk to and just bring up any issues they may have. Could prevent any possible situations. Usually less severe, but there are the potential of an active shooter situation. It's just good for someone to have someone to talk to. And then having incident action plans and just how the company and the workers are going to operate and react to when there is an emergency on the Port of Anchorage. Just knowing what they're going to do and how they're going to follow through with these incident action plans is just a good idea overall. And that is going to be my presentation on the Port of Anchorage for my final project. Thank you very much.